Hello, everyone. My name is Fabiola Velasco Argente, and I'm an English teacher. I have been teaching for a while, and I have had the opportunity to work with different educational levels and various learning materials, which in the last few years have made me wonder how women are represented in them, if represented at all. So last year I was at a crossroads because I had to teach online at university and I had to make the decision of working with a book or creating my own materials. And let me tell you that it took me just one picture to make me realize that I needed to create and work with my own materials. So let me explain. I had this book of the level that I had to teach because my university has used it before, and it is my job to go over that available material and make sure that it fits my syllabus. So I was flicking through some pages and I found this huge 50s black and white picture in which a woman is wearing an apron and she's hovering a carpet. And the unit was about house chores. And I asked myself the following questions. What is this picture trying to portray, and why isn't there a man there doing the same? I flicked through some more pages and I realized that the contents of the units were about random things, houses, animals, male athletes, and few were about women. At the end, I had this massive question in mind: where are all the women at? So thank you for joining me today to learn more about how women are represented in learning materials, the importance of this, and how we can change that. So the purpose of my presentation is to foster reflection on how learning materials can perpetuate dangerous biases and to encourage you to balance male and female representation in the classroom. In order to do that, um, I will first provide a panorama of gender inequality in our country, along with how learning materials can shape students' views on the roles of women and men in society. And at the end, I will share with you some practical considerations on how you can approach gender equality and contribute to a better gender perspective based on my own experience and what I have experimented with my students. So first things first, I think that it's essential to highlight the difference of these terms: sex, gender, and gender representation. First of all, sex is generally used to refer to a binary of being, either female or male, as denoted by the attributes that comprise biological sex. Gender, on the other hand, is meant to refer to the various socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender diverse people. And this social division into masculine and feminine varies enormously among societies, as each one of them develop its own classification based on their own principles. Now, gender representation elucidates on the qualities, the aptitudes, the roles, and responsibilities associated with men and women in a given context. And this representation of genders is often based on gender stereotypes, which are overgeneralizations and beliefs about personality traits and about how women and men should act and behave. Now, what happens in our country? For centuries, the Mexican culture has built gender stereotypes in which men are considered to be the breadwinners, the chiefs of the family, and the ones in charge of making decisions. On the other hand, women's role is considered to be devoted at home and is seen as invisible and undervalued. According to the Instituto Nacional de las Mujeres, these gender stereotypes are mostly visible at home, as house chores between men and women are highly differentiated because men are still considered to be the breadwinners and women to be considered housewives. And for that reason, I didn't want to use the book I was telling you about at the beginning, because that picture was perpetuating a gender stereotypes. Now, in our country, inequalities between genders are significant and are reflected in different fields such as education, health, economics, and politics. And these gender inequalities are still perceived as normal. And this can contribute to psychosocial barriers that can restrain the choices and the opportunities that individuals may have. I do agree that it's necessary for women to realize that they can be agents of change and not just object of it. Education, along with our family and friends and the media, play this pivotal role in addressing issues of inequality. And learning materials can contribute to cultural prejudices and gender stereotypes, since they can nurture our students into dominant patterns of gender relationships and behaviors that can stick with them forever. These stereotypes can be embedded in everything that we bring into the classroom, such as topics, examples, texts, and even visuals. And there's proofs that there's an imbalanced representation in learning materials in which women are given stereotype roles. They do not appear as frequent as men do, and sometimes they are even repressed. Using gender-biased textbooks and learning materials may negatively affect our female students' perceptions of social and behavioral roles, as well as career aspirations and personal development. According to Sunderland, gender representation in course books affect language learners in three ways. There's an unconscious influence of restricted social, behavioral, and linguistic female roles. This can hinder female students' learning as they become demotivated if they notice restricted portrayals. And this can promote models of language that can become classroom practice, such as male firstness in conversation. Therefore, it's vital to produce and maintain gender balanced learning materials. And that's what I wanted to do with my course, my English course. So these were my ideas. I wanted to increase female representation in my classroom, and I wanted to show the work that many women have done in different areas such as science, art, education, and politics. I also wanted my materials to be contextualized in a way so my students could feel identified with them. I wanted to talk about Mexican women and Latinas. I also wanted that material to have an important message for my students, specifically my female students. And last but not least, I wanted to portray men in roles that they are not usually portrayed. So this was my plan. I wanted to provide answer to those questions. What do you want to talk about, and who are you going to talk about? What's the message that you want to portray by providing those examples? What about men? What are you going to do with men? And what are your students' opinions? Because I really wanted to know what my students thought of the materials that I brought into the classroom. So the first thing that I did was that I analyzed my syllabus and I selected the contents that I could use to bring more more female representation. Then I selected different topics and some examples. For example, I decided to talk about female athletes such as Alejandra Valencia and Alexa Moreno and some Mexican female boxers. I also decided to talk about female superheroes when talking about expressions, to talk about abilities. I decided to talk about women's right to vote in our countries, so I could teach passive voice. We talk about some Mexican female painters as well, so I could teach object and subject questions. So we talk about Frida Kahlo, Maria Izquierdo, and Marta Chapa. I also decided to bring different interviews of Latina actresses, famous pop singers, and famous female rappers, so I could teach reported speech. And last but not least, when teaching second conditional, I brought an article about Forbes' most powerful women in our country. So my materials looked something like this. There was a lot of female representation. There were Mexican women and Latinas in them because I wanted to show the work that they have done and how successful they are. And after that, I wanted to make sure that I had an important message for my students. So when we talk about female athletes, the lesson there was that another woman can be an inspiration for others. When we talk about super heroines or superheroes, we discuss that sometimes rich people can turn into super heroines or superheroes by doing just something nice for someone else. When we talk about women's right to vote in our country, I wanted my students to be aware of the struggle women went through so they could have that right. And we also talk about 10 great inventions by women, and I wanted them to realize that women can be as good as men and that more and more women are entering the field of STEM than ever before. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. When we talk about different Mexican female painters, there was this one painter that mentioned that many women have created beautiful works of art. However, they are not appreciated because they are women. And when I brought different interviews of actresses, pop singers, and rappers, they were given some advice for young women in which they mentioned that young women need to be confident and that they need to be themselves. And when we talk about the most powerful women in Mexico, I want them to know that women can be successful in several fields and that by doing just small actions, people can also make a change. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't discredit men. So when possible, I portray them in two ways. As sensible beings and capable of doing the house chores. So I kept this as a secret to my students. They didn't know the things that I was doing in our course. So they knew that at the end of our course when I asked them to complete a survey. So I want to share with you some of the results that I got. So when I asked them about the importance of female representation in learning materials, they mentioned the following. In most learning materials, men are being provided as examples. We need to provide more equal opportunities and show more fair pictures. Our society tends to be sexist. Including women's history in learning materials can generate female power, and future generations can be more conscious about women and can value them more. When we see what women have done in the world, it broadens our view about women's achievements. From my point of view, it allows female students to reflect themselves on these successful women who have done and developed big things in the world and who have broken paradigms. I remember more men than women in learning materials. This must change. Now, when I ask them about the materials that they have used in their previous courses, they said the following. Actually, they are always about men. Most of our courses have not included pictures about women, even when we are mostly women here in our major. In my previous courses, female representation wasn't there. It was not considered. The lack of female representation in our previous courses have made me feel excluded as a woman. Now, when I asked them about my course, they expressed these things. Most of the topics were about important women. A huge part of what we learned was about women, and that made the course interesting. It allows us to know the job or work that very few know are done or were created by women. I learned about new female public figures, and I remember some others. It was very enriching as all this wasn't all about men. I like this course very much because of that representation. And I really like the fact that women were addressed in this course. I felt that representation. So as you can see, my students have worked with gender bias learning materials, and you can also identify how they felt after working with the material that I brought into our classroom. So to me, this is evidence that some changes need to be made. So in this presentation, we have talked about the following things. Taking into account the Mexican context, gender inequalities are still substantial, and we are perpetuating this as textbooks and learning materials are still gender biased. And this needs to change since children and our students develop gender stereotypes from early stages, which can stay with them for their whole lives. I know that there's still work to be done to reduce gender bias in learning materials. However, there's something that we can do to make sure that we're fostering gender equality in our classroom, because there's plenty of authentic material out there that we can use to normalize female representation. So I did a small presentation. I would like you to reflect on the following. What type of textbooks or learning materials am I using? Am I perpetuating gender stereotypes? What can I do to foster gender equality? So thank you very much for listening to this presentation. If you have done something similar in your classroom, I will be very glad to hear about it. If you were my student last year, how is it going with your other courses? Let me know. And if you're my student right now, and if you're watching this, let me know what you think about our course now. As for myself, I'm trying to continue with this in a different way, and I hope to share the results with you next year. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you very soon. Bye bye.